Now we will proceed to our first panel. I mean, the concept seems straightforward. We will have in-person speakers and Zoom speakers that will answer questions we have prepared. And in this sense, I'm asking my colleague if Claudio Babiloni is online, is with us. It's okay. Then Claudio Babiloni was the first speaker of today. Then I will invite Stephen Gouveia to come on the scene. Thank you, Stephen. It's your choice. Professor Georg Northoff, would you please also accompany us? You have met all these amazing thinkers and scientists. Now I will introduce a speaker that has not had any intervention yet, Volha Litvinets. She's a digital ethicist, responsible AI researcher, and consultant. She defended her Ph.D. thesis in 2022 at Sorbonne University in Paris. Her study examined the ethical application of artificial intelligence in digital marketing. The Artificial Intelligence and Equality Initiative of the Carnegie Council employed her as a researcher fellow in the past. Volha has extensive knowledge of digital marketing and quite an extensive experience working in the IT sector. She also has experience in the public sector, having worked as an intern at the UN Office for Disarmament on an analysis of lethal autonomous weapons conventions. Finally, she's also a risk consultant for Ernst & Young. Volha, please. And last but not least, a man whose work and reputation precedes him, Stephen Grossberg. At Boston University, he holds the Wang Chair in Cognitive and Neural Systems, serves as the Center for Adaptive Systems Director, and is an emeritus professor of mathematics and statistics, psychological and brain sciences, and biomedical engineering. Professor Grossberg is a key founder and contemporary leader in the fields of computational neuroscience, theoretical cognitive science, and engineering, technology, and AI with a biological inspiration. He collaborated on the editorial boards of 30 journals and helped establish important institutions in the field of neural networks. He has authored over 560 research articles, 17 books, or special journal issues that have been published by him. He also holds 7 patents. His magnum opus, the 2021 book, Conscious Mind, Resonant Brain, How Each Brain Makes a Mind, received the Association of American Publishers 2022 Prose Book Prize in Neuroscience. Professor Grossberg, thank you for joining us today on Zoom, and I will... You will have the floor now, Professor Grossberg.
I'm delighted to participate in this panel discussion about consciousness and AI. I was told I could give an opening statement of 10 minutes, so here I go. Let me start by saying that I never try to explain consciousness. I just try to explain how humans learn. And remarkably, my models of learning led to insights about consciousness. In fact, 6 different kinds of conscious awareness with different functions in different parts of our brains emerge from this. But more generally, essentially all the deepest insights about how our brains work concerns how they self-organize during childhood development and adult learning. And I first want to note that in all my modeling work, my first step was to try to understand the intuitive meaning of body of data that fascinated me. And I fell in love with data about learning because learning has always been such a big part of my life, both as a student and a scientist. And I always started with psychological data because brain evolution needs to achieve behavioral success. And that's just another way to say that Darwinian selection operates during evolution to shape the designs of advanced brains. Is needed to achieve behavioral success, if only because we live in a changing world. Events and interactions within and across several brain regions are needed to generate psychological behaviors that realize behavioral success. So psychological behaviors are emergent properties of widespread brain interactions, and purely experimental approaches cannot fully understand emergent properties, and for this models are essential. So in 1957, when I was a 17-year-old freshman taking introductory psychology at Dartmouth College, classical data about learning inspired me to introduce the paradigm of using systems of nonlinear differential equations to begin to explain how each brain makes a mind. Am I frozen on your screen? Anyway, I'll keep going, hopefully not, including basic equations for neural activation or short-term memory, for activity-dependent habituation or medium-term memory, and as well as some of the basic modules or microcircuits that are built from these equations. Excuse me, can you hear me? Yeah, nod yes if you can. Have you been hearing me? And some of the modal architectures that assemble the equations and modules in specialized form to realize different modalities of intelligence. And in order to arrive and incrementally develop these models, I developed a modeling method and cycle because you can't fully understand a brain in one modeling step. And I've gone through this cycle many times since I began my work 66 years ago, and you can find it in my magnum opus that was mentioned. And this message shows how to discover design principles that underlie large psychological databases, how to convert these principles into the minimal models that embody them, and then how to use these models to explain a lot more. A delightful surprise to me as a college freshman is that the models also explained and predicted neural data and indeed looked like part of a living brain. And that's how I introduced biological neural network models in 1957. The central question in all the work is how our brains learn quickly without forgetting just as quickly, or how do our brains learn quickly without experiencing catastrophic forgetting? And I call this the stability plasticity dilemma. And I introduced adaptive resonance theory, or ART, in 1976 to solve this problem. ART's been incrementally developed to the present day to explain and predict ever larger interdisciplinary databases about how our brains make our minds, and is today the most advanced cognitive and neural theory of how our brains learn to attend, recognize, and predict objects and events in the changing world filled with unexpected events. And I say this with confidence for several reasons. First, all the foundational hypotheses of ART have been confirmed by subsequent experiments, and it's explained many other experiments. But most fundamentally, in a much cited article in Psychological Review from a thought experiment about how correct predictive errors in a changing world. And the hypotheses of these thought experiments are a few facts that are familiar to everyone because they're ubiquitous environmental pressures on the evolution of our brains. And nowhere during the thought experiment are the words mind or brain mentioned. So ART design principle mechanisms are a universal solution of the stability-plasticity dilemma. I also used a thought experiment to derive a model of cognitive emotional processes, or how thinking and feeling interact to realize valued goals, and that also explains lots of facts. I call this model the COG-M model, short for cognitive emotional motor model. And remarkably, these models together propose explanations of how we consciously see, hear, feel, and know things about the world, and use conscious states to plan and act to realize valued goals. Conscious states all arise from resonance between two or more brain regions, match their signals well enough to cause active cells to synchronize and sustain their firing long enough to trigger learning and consciousness. And the feedback signals in art are learned top-down expectations that protect art category learning from catastrophic forgetting, and that's how it solves the stability plasticity problem. And each learned top-down expectation chooses and focuses attention upon a short-term memory pattern of critical features, which are the features that regulate successful learning, prediction, and consciousness. All other features are irrelevant outliers and are suppressed. And I gradually realized these art resonances embody parametric properties of the psychological data they explain about conscious experiences, and the kind of resonance that occurs in art I call a feature category resonance, because it supports conscious recognition of distributed features that are bound together by the learned category. Now, deep learning uses the backpropagation learning algorithm, and both of these models experience catastrophic forgetting, so they're unreliable. They're also untrustworthy because they're not explainable. Even if they work, you can't explain why. And that's true because they're just feed-forward adaptive filters. Unlike art, which is reliable and explainable, they have no learned top-down expectations, no resonances to stabilize their learning, have no activations or short-term memory, and no information processing of any kind. And these problems were already known in 1988, and they've never been solved. My work identifies 6 kinds of resonances. Feature category resonances consciously recognize visual objects and scenes. Surface shroud resonances consciously see visual objects and scenes. Stream shroud resonances consciously hear auditory objects and streams. Spectral pitch and timbre resonances consciously recognize auditory objects and streams. Item list resonances consciously recognize speech and language, and consciously cognitive emotional resonances consciously feel emotions and know their source. So
hear you very well, Professor Grossberg. We cannot.
Mind and brain universal
Professor Grossberg, we cannot
and
hear you very well.
These are the models that I summarize in my magnum opus. I just have one more sentence.
For sure.
I have one more sentence. Design autonomous adaptation, autonomous consciousness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, as Professor Grossberg opened this panel, we will proceed to ask questions that our attendees in the panel will answer one by one. So the first one, and this is the setting of the question, in the last 2 months, we all witnessed big voices that are involved in the generation and creation of AI that addressed serious concerns over unregulated and savage AI development. Now the question is, and I will turn to Volha first, what does ethics in artificial intelligence really mean? Why do we need to take extra measures with this matter? Volha? I think her microphone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here alongside such brilliant researchers. I'm a fellow panelist. And I will share my insights today as a researcher in artificial intelligence ethics. It's very good you started with determination of terms in a very good approach in research. So what we really mean by artificial intelligence? There is a joke I always tell to my students, what is the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning? So somebody knows. So if it's written on Python, so it's machine learning. If it's written on PowerPoint, so it's artificial intelligence. And basically, the term artificial intelligence and the definition of artificial intelligence is problematic because there are so many definitions. And let's consider one taken from European AI Act, and they consider the definition made by OECD. AI system, it's a machine-based system which is able to impact the environment by producing the output based on a set of parameters. Mm-hmm. So this is artificial intelligence, and this term appeared first on the Dartmouth College, written by the godfather of this research subject for the research purpose. So basically, when you write a research purpose, you want to use something more beautiful, you know, to get some grants. So they chose this term, but we started to use it as a common term. Now, ethics of artificial intelligence. Ethics, it's a part of a philosophy studying morality. Does the machine-based system can the machine-based system have really a morality? Can it have ethics? Probably not, but we use it as a common term too. So basically, this is also the term is problematic because when we start delegate this kind of moral agency and decision-making agency to machines, we kind of accept ourselves from this process. And we need to just take back our responsibility, but still it's a common use term, so we continue to use it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Northoff, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I think it's good to hear the definitions. I mean, first, I want to point out there's a difference between AI and the brain, and I would say one of the differences, I pointed it out, is the timescales. Agents have no waves. That's why I called this book Neurowaves. And I think that's a key component in aligning and synchronizing with the world. And you see, you said the artificial agent can manipulate the environment. Certainly true, humans can do that too. No, I don't contradict. I say I want to go the other way around. I want to say that artificial agent cannot really align and synchronize with the world in that sense. Yeah? So that's why I'm speaking of alignment and of the brain as a part becomes part of the world as a whole. And I think that step agents are not possible to these days. So that's why I speak of ontologically of a world-brain relation. I think there's an agent-environment relation, but not an environment-agent relation, because the agent doesn't really embed and integrate and align itself within the context, because it doesn't have, and that's my guess, it doesn't have the multitude of timescales, which in the brain are extremely flexible. So that's still a key difference. So now that's sort of that from a scientific perspective. Now the use, and then I come to the ethical stuff is already included in that, yeah. The second point, the use. So I'm a psychiatrist, I'm also a neuroscientist philosopher, but now I speak as a psychiatrist. And I see that the key dysfunction in mental disorders like depression, schizophrenia, indicated for schizophrenia and bipolar anxiety and so on and so forth, are really disturbances in these alignment processes, which I described earlier, / in the timescales. Because these patients cannot properly navigate and synchronize and align with the world, and that's why they're sort of estranged. And they don't come to us because of hallucination, they come because they cannot navigate within the world. I had patients who had 30 years of hallucination and not seen a psychiatrist. Yeah, so I don't tell you what I'm experiencing now. So anyway, so that's really a key. So now, why do I say that? Because if this isn't really a timescale disturbance, then I would like to have agents which individualize, can strengthen the timescales that is deficient. We as humans will not be able to do that because we have such a multitude of timescales, we will not be able to specifically target one timescale. So this is basically like a laser in surgery. The laser is much more able to really target the key where you need the surgery. We are not able to do that. So that's why I want artificial agents. So many people of my students, many people are surprised that I'm endorsing artificial intelligence. So now, while you were speaking, and I always read the question there with the ethics, so I have to comment on that. Of course, I see the danger. I know the last 2 months and this moratorium. I mean, the analogy, I cannot answer that question, obviously, but the analogy which came to my mind, and I hope it doesn't come as far as it was, let's say, I draw the comparison with nuclear weapons. So this is also technology which basically goes beyond us and we cannot control anymore. Yeah, let's face it. And there was in the 50s and 60s of last century a lot of discussion, also philosophical discussion. Martin Heidegger had a very distinct position to that. So, and despite being insufficient, there is at least some kind of regulation and moratorium for nuclear weapons there. I hope that we start earlier with that in the case of artificial intelligence. Yeah? But I think thus freezing it probably will not be sufficient. I mean, you have to see once, and I'm living in North America, once money is in the game, there are no borders. And once money is in the game, there's a lot of pretense. And pretense means, okay, I have some pseudo guidelines beneath which I exploit the situation. Yeah, so, and this is because I could not say this, for instance, in Canada. People would kill me over there for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't tell you what I infer from that. Yeah. So I say this in Europe, and that's something I must say. I was recently in April in Brussels with the European Parliament and things. There is still a certain value codex in Europe. Yeah. As much as there is critique about administration, blah, 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 blah in Europe, there is still a certain value-guided approach to the world, and you see it in sort of how they reign in the big tech companies and so on and so forth. And I think that's really important.
For sure.
Yeah. So I strongly endorse that of the European Parliament and this value discussion. Just freezing it, as some big names, particularly in North America, say, I think it's not the solution.
For sure.
Yeah, because that's probably exactly those people who want to exploit it, and Elon Musk just wants to outperform OpenAI with that. Sorry to say this, you say you want to increase my neuroleptics now because I'm paranoid. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, keep it. Stephen, I think Claudio Babiloni is still with us. That's an important question.
So, is it me?
Yeah, it's you.
Okay, so yeah, I actually fully agree with the first intervention. So I'm a philosopher. I can say weird things, and I don't think there is an ethics of AI. Okay. Exactly because of that, because there is no such a thing as AI in the broadest sense. What there is many different applications with many different technological structures, and what I argue for in my work is that we need to create very different kind of ethical thinking and consideration about the different kind of AI tools we have. To give you just an example, do you know what a sex robot is? Yeah? No? Raise your hand if you know what it is. Okay. So a sex robot is an interesting thing because it's an object where basically you can have intimacy with that object, and the idea is that that technology is so developed right now that you can have conversations about consent with that kind of, which is a weird thing, right? But there are many different arguments in favor or against sex robots. So one of the most, I think, positive arguments in favor of sex robots is actually the idea that we have a lot of human sex trafficking right now, which is a real phenomenon, right? And we, as a society, we should do anything we can to stop with that kind of immoral situation. Most of the victims of this situation are women. So we need to find ways to fight this problem. And sex robots, they can supposedly replace that, so they are ethical in this sense. But then you also have a very strong negative argument against sex robots, which is what we can call the feminist argument. The idea is that these sex robots, they basically recreate an hypersexualized view of women in general. And the point is that we need to create incentives to stop considering women and human beings in general as hypersexualized. We need to create a safer environment for women. So this is another strong negative argument against sex robots. And this is just a brief introduction to show you that this is a very specific ethical analysis that you can do. But then if you think about AI in medicine, for example, or diagnosis, or the elaboration of treatments, the ethical analysis will be very different. So that's why I started my intervention by saying that there is no such a thing as an ethics of AI, but there is, for example, an ethics of sex robots, and there is an ethics of AI medicine. And I think we should consider this seriously, because a lot of the time the idea, the philosophical idea is to say, okay, let's create some general guidelines, and for some reason the ethicists will apply them to these specific tools, but because they are so different in nature, I don't think this is the right way, or at least it's not the useful or more efficient way to do ethics of AI. Just to conclude my intervention, I also think that we need to seriously fight this kind of methodological bias that we have as a society. We always develop the technology first, and only then we consider the ethical implications. So I think it would be very wise to reverse this methodological bias by first thinking about the ethical considerations, and once we have enough ethical standards, we should develop and use the technology. But this is very difficult to do because a lot of the companies, they have incentive to develop the technology first, and they see ethicists like us as like the devil that should not be there. But I think we really need, as a society, and this is where you come from, you can also be part of this. So you need to use your political status to also have a point and have a voice in this debate. So we need ethics first and only the technology after. Yeah.
For sure. Curbing human greed is a Herculean task. We go now to Professor Babiloni for his intervention on this question.
Yes, I hope that my comments are useful for the discussion, because I'm not an expert. I can say that ChatGPT is something very important, because it's a powerful friend and mate for a lot of researchers that can have some integration of internet information on science, on different aspects of science. They work as a nice and strong co-worker. The main problem is that the ChatGPT and this kind of intelligent artificial intelligence tools can mix information, then provide some fake concepts, because they use some statistical algorithms to capture information from internet. But the same is true for our brain, because when we have an idea, when we have a new concept, this is a statistical elaboration of what we read or what we know, or is a statistical association of our biological neural network. So the mechanism is the same from unconscious elaboration to conceptual and conscious ideas. But the point is that the fake information, the mixed information, and the ethical point of the sources of information. So I think that it's a very powerful tool for all scientists and all people who want to have an integrated view of information from internet. And our main point is try to work on these tools in order to associate the sources of information with the the elaboration of information. So, and also to every time state to the users that there is the possibility of mixed information, of fake statements and so on, and that all the material produced by these tools should be checked, should be verified by the user, always. It should be considered as a preparatory material extracted from internet. This is my point. And I don't agree with people who say that it's too risky to be used from general people at the present stage of the technology. I think it's much better ChatGPT than weapons that you can buy to the shops in several countries, and many other tools that can give the images to other people. Okay, this is my point.
Microphone is on now. We proceed to the next question of this panel, which is addressed to Volha Litvinets.
Excuse me, shouldn't I have a comment also?
Oh, okay, Professor Grosberg, please, we assume you give the introductory talk, but for sure, please feel free.
Well, it wasn't about ethics in
yeah,
AI.
For sure.
So if I can briefly say, I'd like to also start with a comment about ChatGPT. As you know, it has no concept of meaning. It has no values to guide its decision-making, and it has no concept of truth or falsity. Moreover, you all probably know that it is trained with deep learning, which is untrustworthy and unreliable. So it's rather terrifying to imagine it being used in medicine and finance. And you might say, well, is it the best game in town for that? And I think the answer is no. For example, AI, whether it includes deep learning and or ChatGPT, is just another word for neural networks of one kind or another. And for example, already in the 1980s, Professor Gail Carpenter was implementing with hospitals in the Boston area medical database predictions that had very high accuracy, that predicted some new rare outcomes and that are reliable and trustworthy. So I think that given, if you believe what I said, and if you can't get out of my thought experiments, you sort of have to, or give the scientific method. If you merge ChatGPT with the foundations for value judgments and even morality that I discussed in chapter 17 of my book, I think you can get a better outcome. But by itself, it's really dangerous, even with a human looking over the shoulder, I'm afraid.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We now build on this idea and go and ask Volha, how can we strike a balance between promoting advancements in AI while addressing the concerns and ethical considerations that arise from its development and that we touched upon here now?
Thank you very much. Here, the balance is very difficult to achieve because we, unfortunately, are living in the real world with business models and all this stuff. And the big companies who we address our ethical questions to, their business models based on KPIs in which the ethics is not included. And this conversation is about ethics. They are using mostly the language of philosophy, which is not understood by the business language. So here, what we can do is to change the perspective and to translate this philosophical language to the business language. and taking into consideration ethics as a part of the governance issues we have. And here we have 4 big pillars. First, it's a hard law. Hard law is everything we can consider as a juristic part of it, like laws appearing on Europe, for example. It's a very well regulated. We have European AI Act, which is about to be signed. We have GDPR. We have a lot of other things. But the problem here is that actually there is a concurrence between countries. And each country wants to advance the technologies, and we are not having the same mentality. We're not having the same perception, even to the privacy and to the technology development. So, second pillar I want to talk about is the soft law. A soft law is everything which is not included in the hard law. It's all the ethical charts and everything we can consider as ethics. But if we consider ethics as something which is like a gray zone, which is not yet covered by governance, but it potentially can become a risk in the future, we can translate it into the business language like that and talk about it as a risk mitigation. In terms of like the 4 big pillar I want to talk about is the quality control and the inside companies and the control on every single step of development of the algorithms, because we know algorithms can be biased, the data set can be biased, poisoned, insufficient, and also the developers themselves they can multiply current biases and so on. So, and it comes to the 4th pillar. Basically, it's self-education and responsibility of specialists and raising awareness of people and of developers, data scientists about these issues. So like this, also multisectional, multidisciplinary collaboration can break this ceiling.
Yeah, that can be a weighty responsibility on one's shoulders, for sure. We will now go to the next question. Some of the questions are addressed to only one panelist, whereas others are 2 or all of them. So the next question, which is addressed to Georg Nortov and Stephen Gouveia, is how does the emergence of artificial consciousness impact our notions of identity, agency, and free will? And how can we navigate the philosophical and ethical implications that arise from potential convergence of human and artificial consciousness? And as each speaker has 5 minutes, I am well aware they should probably focus on one idea, despite the generality of the question. So, Georg, if you want, or Stephen, who, perfect.
Okay, so I have some ideas about this question. So I think we should think of Alan Turing. So Alan Turing, I think, is one of the most misunderstood, like, philosophers or computer scientists, whatever you want to call him, especially because of the Turing test. So a lot of people think that the Turing test is a test to evaluate intelligence, but that was not the point at all of what Turing was trying to say. The point of Turing was to say that all these concepts, mental concepts such as consciousness, free will, intelligence, they are like related with how the technological development will happen. So the idea is that technological development will redefine our mental concepts, and we will need to consider those redefinitions to apply those concepts in the future. And this has nothing to do to test if a system is intelligent or not, but it's to say that intelligence needs to incorporate the development that the world have. Having said that, this brings me another idea which comes from a doctor, a psychiatrist from the 19th century in Portugal called Miguel de Bombarda, and he has this idea about consciousness. So the point that he made, and actually Anil sort of talked about this, he thought that the technological development will not answer to the problem of consciousness, but it will make it simply disappear. Why? Because once we reach a level where we have artificial entities that behave exactly like a human being, and we don't have any tools to understand if they are humans or not. Once we reach that point, the problem of consciousness will not be interesting to pose, but the problem will just dissolve itself. So we will not have like a philosophical answer to the problem, but the problem will just stop making sense. Just like a lot of the questions we had in the history of philosophy stopped to make sense. So just to give you an idea of the history of psychiatry, before people thought that different kind of mental disease could be explained by the possession of demons. So it was the theory of the demonic possessions. So every specific mental disease had a very specific demon, and now we don't do this question. We don't need to answer this question, but it's not a useful question. So this medical doctor in Portugal, he actually thought that the same would happen with consciousness. We will stop making the question because the question will start to be irrelevant. And this is basically the main intuition of Alan Turing as well regarding all the mental concepts. Just to finish my intervention, the idea of artificial consciousness is very interesting because, so I was with Anil in Taormina in the Science of Consciousness conference in Sicily just 1 week ago, and there everyone could vote on a theory of consciousness in the end. And like, it was crazy because there were like 14 theories of consciousness, like 1-4. Like something is really wrong when you have so many theories to explain a phenomenon, right? So I think we are far from what we want to achieve regarding artificial consciousness, not because we cannot do it technologically or empirically, but because we don't know what it means to have a human consciousness in the first place. So I think we need to consider these two ideas, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stephen. Georg?
This one works? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I partially align and agree with what the two of you said. I think one thing which really is that these notions make you think about the mechanism and what is different. From the point of view of a neuroscientist, what differs in the architecture in the brain from the architecture of a deep learning model. Yeah, and you know my answer to that. One key is timescales. The other one is an intrinsic topography, which I mentioned often in my talk. And the third one is the unbelievable malleability and adaptivity of the human brain. It's incredible, and I tell you that as a researcher who was completely fascinated by this task periodicity, what I show. You have a transient topographic reorganization. The brain suddenly doesn't care anymore about its lower order sensory and higher order region, just to synchronize with the external stimulus. It's incredible, yeah? The spontaneous activity is for alignment, for really to adaptivity. And that adaptivity, as paradoxical as it sounds, also is directly positively related to the degree to which we manipulate the world. The better we can adapt, the better you can manipulate. Yeah, it sounds paradoxical, but it's not. And I think that is really the specification of the architecture. For instance, in our empirical data analysis, I would like to see whether we have a deep learning network, once with multiple timescales and once without. If a clever computer engineer, either on Python or whatever, can build it to me, and then we can see which of the two better predicts the brain data. And I expect it's the one with the timescales. And maybe there's no difference between the two networks for, let's say, schizophrenic data, because their temporal organization is messed up. So here you just see an application, how you can use it. Definitely I agree that the question of consciousness, and you see I already tried to do this in my TTC, to split it up. When you look into the history of science, you started with a big concept and then you slice it up. Gradually slice it up, slice it up, slice it up, slice it up. Has always been the case. And at the beginning you have a very metaphorical, very abstract concept, for instance, concept of limbic system in neuroscience, and then you pin it down and you pin it down, and we don't need it anymore. And that's my idea with the TTC. We have these four mechanisms, and I already see there's a recent paper where I already split the alignment into 3 sub-mechanisms. Yeah, and the same with the nestedness, what we do now. So meaning when in 20 years, another guy who's more clever than me comes and say, okay, here, great, your TTC 4 mechanism is great, but it's old. You need 100 mechanisms. I say, great job. Yeah, that's exactly, and then specify. And that has been the history of science without losing the basic idea. Yeah? For instance, typical concept is élan vital from Henri Bergson. This has been basically made superfluous by the introduction of all the genetic code. By the way, we don't even know the code of the brain yet. Yeah? The last point I want to make, comparison with other technologies. Now AI is a big topic. 10 years ago, something else has been the big topic, and so on and so forth. And in 5 years, there will be chairs for another technology, and your AI chair is already out of fashion. Okay, that's the way it is, and that's good because there's flexibility, because if you don't change, you die. So, and I would strongly recommend with other technology, like genetics. There was a lot of discussion about genetic manipulation. Now it's common. It's a common case in cancer treatment. Yeah, another technology, a failed technology, for instance, which I myself was able to observe. You may not know this, was a fetal brain tissue transplantation in Parkinson's, where they injected fetal brain tissues from pregnant women or aborted fetus into the certain regions in the brain in Parkinson's patients. Big effort at the end of the 90s, brilliant science around it. Anders Björklund from Lund in Sweden, brilliant, really, the science was brilliant, failed. Yeah, there was a double-blind placebo control. So the question, and there was a lot of discussion, ethical discussion, you can imagine implanting a fetus into the brain. I did the personal identity investigation of these people. So again, I think the technology can sharpen our view and also put things into context. And I think the comparison with other technology would be key in the development of whatever what you want to call an ethics of AI.
Okay, thank you. No, I think the next question is for Stephen Grossberg, but the question will be slightly different. So, Professor Grossberg, how can artificial intelligence contribute to the understanding and replication even of human memory and consciousness?
Well,
can you hear us? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
It concerns me how much solipsism there is in the field, including the remark there are 14 theories of consciousness. That's a sick field. I already remarked that art's the most advanced cognitive and neural theory about how our brains learn to attend, recognize, and predict objects and events in a changing world. All its hypotheses are confirmed. It's explained hundreds of additional experiments. And in 1980, I derived it from a thought experiment about how any system can autonomously learn in a changing world. The hypotheses are well known, and that thought experiment and the result of art leads to a theory of consciousness, how we consciously see, hear, feel, and know things about the world. And you can't understand how consciousness works in an explanatorily predictive way if you don't understand adaptive resonances. It's not an opinion. It's established and it's been known for decades. So why do we have this solipsism today? I think one of the reasons is that people just don't know the psychological database, which is vast, going back to Helmholtz, who was mentioned and is one of my heroes. And to call AI, which in the mind of some is just neural networks, and in the mind, and by neural networks, many people believe it's deep learning. Well, deep learning is not a foundation on which to build any theory of intelligence, and it certainly can't do consciousness. So I'm disappointed. I've been around for decades. I've been working for 66 years. It's as solipsistic now as it was 30 years ago. That's very sad to me. But that doesn't stop the field from moving forward. You should really read my book. You really should.
Yes, we agree with you. So we will wrap this panel here, the first panel of today, and we'll have another one soon. We'll have a break. So let's thank our speakers once again.